What is going on, everyone? We have made it to my off-season deep dive series where throughout the course of the summer, we are going to be counting down to my number one ranked team heading into the 2023 NFL season. Today, we're going to be talking about the 32nd ranked Arizona Cardinals. Now, because this is the first video of the series, I wanted to just talk a little bit about what the format is going to look like here. So we're going to start by looking at the team's offseason, their additions and subtractions. Then we'll get into the staff and the scheme and what sorts of X's and O's we might be seeing from each team. Then we're going to go through the roster. We're going to rank each position group, how they stack up against the rest of the league. Then we'll get into the schedule and my win total projections for every team. And then I'm going to try and have as many guests as possible throughout the course of this series. So looking forward to that as well. Before we do get started, if you could do me a huge favor, please do take just a second to hit that like button down below. It's a free and easy way to support this channel and this series in a meaningful way. A ton of effort goes into this series, as you'll see from these graphics that I make all by myself. So if you could just take a second to hit that like button, would really help the success of this series. I would really appreciate it. And of course, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of these 32 deep dives throughout the next few months. And let's get into it. Starting with what was a very busy offseason for new Cardinals general manager Monti Ossenfort, who didn't just make a bunch of moves here that we're going to talk about here, but also collected a first and a third round pick from the Houston Texans, of all teams, in this upcoming draft, potentially increasing their chances of getting guys like Marvin Harrison Jr. in this upcoming draft class that looks really good. So a very promising start to the new regime here. But, as we see with a lot of, let's face it, rebuilding teams, they're going to come in and really turn over the roster to kind of set themselves up to find out who can the core players of this team be as they commence on this rebuild. So, I don't know if we're going to have a list of additions and subtractions quite as vast as this Cardinals one. I'm not going to probably hit on every single player here because we're going to talk about them as we go throughout this video. But, it is worth noting, potentially not present for this team this upcoming season are probably the two best players on this team. DeAndre Hopkins, Kyler Murray. Murray, of course, coming off that ACL injury, and we will talk about him, but if and when he's going to be available is going to be a major question mark for this team. Worth noting as we think about this team heading into next year. And then DeAndre Hopkins as well. He says he's back for now after requesting a trade a couple months ago, and now he's back on podcast talking about his next team. So to me, it does feel like it's still likely that he gets traded. I think the Cardinals are just being very smart. Again, good job by Monti Ossenfort to, hold their cards, pun intended, and, not just ship him away for nothing. Make someone realize the value of DeAndre Hopkins and give up a second-round pick for him. And to me, I still think that's pretty likely as we look forward. So it does put us in a weird spot. We got to get on with the series. We can't sit around and wait for this trade to happen. It makes things difficult as far as projecting what this offense is going to look like. But it does feel pretty likely that there will be some missed snaps, to say the least, between Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins. But beyond that, their starting center, Billy Price, who, was a bust in the first round, but actually played pretty well for them last year. They're going to be looking for a new center. Marcus Golden on the edge, as well as Zach Allen and J.J. Watt retiring. So 4 key starters up front there. And then Byron Murphy. I was a little bit surprised they chose not to bring him back with what we're going to see being the state of this cornerback room. It ain't great, Bob. So like I said, they're going to be looking to find out who are going to be the core players at that cornerback position moving forward. Some less concerning departures here. Cliff Kingsbury, the head coach, of course, with Vance Joseph, the defensive coordinator, who's going to head to Denver, along with A.J. Green retiring. Max Garcia, who started at left guard for them, was very much replacement level for them. Chosen Robbie Anderson, who Cliff Kingsbury for some reason traded a 6th-round pick for, or whatever it was, played 200 snaps, didn't do anything with him. And then Ben Neiman, who this team frustratingly was rotating in and around Zaven Collins and Isaiah Simmons last year. Hopefully no more of that this year. So obviously those are a lot of snaps to replace, but I don't think it's going to be too big of a difficulty to replace those snaps from those specific players. When you want to talk about additions, man, they are really opening up cap space, and they're going to go with the youth approach. All of their additions their key additions at least, are staff and draft picks. So they're bringing in Jonathan Gannon, Drew Petzing, Nick Rallis, the new kind of trident for this coaching staff. We'll get into them in just a second. But through the draft, Paris Johnson, BJ Ojulari, Garrett Williams, their first 3 picks. I expect, pending health with Garrett Williams, all of these guys to be key contributors for them this year. Then some smaller additions listed there. Again, we will get into these guys as we go throughout the roster, but you can kind of just see it all laid out there. A lot of lower level roster fillers and day 3 draft picks there to fill in the holes of this roster and compete for starting work. Now, before we do dive into those players on the roster, I want to talk about the coaching staff and the scheme outlook here for this Cardinals team. And let's not sugarcoat it. Let's not beat around the bush. I'm skeptical about the Jonathan Gannon hiring. I just am. He's going to rank 32nd coming into the league. And it's nothing I have against Jonathan Gannon. I'll be rooting for him to succeed. But for a couple reasons here. Number one, just hiring a defensive coach has basically proven out over the last 5 or 6 years in this modern offensive explosion that we've seen around the NFL, that the defensive head coaches, even the great ones, and that's if you get a great one, just are kind of capped a little bit, right? Mike Zimmer, Ron Rivera, even like Brian Flores in Miami kind of reached his ceiling as the offense faltered. I would even argue like Sean McDermott in Buffalo. They've been kind of left behind the 8 ball, behind the Andy Reids and the Kyle Shanahans, and even the Zach Taylors of the world, an offensive mind. It just, in this league, offense is not just more important than defense. Every analytical or just your own eyeballs could tell you that. But if you have a defensive-minded head coach, the second you find a good offensive coordinator, he's going to get a head coaching job somewhere else. So it's really hard to sustain success with a defensive-minded head coach. It's not that it can't be a good hiring, but it is a higher or a lower ceiling decision to go with the defensive-minded head coach. But it's not just that. In fact, even more than that, it's the decision to hire a coach that wants to run this scheme. The Fangio-inspired, quarters-heavy, split safety, off-zone defense. And I can't really emphasize this enough. Many of you watching this know why I'm skeptical about this scheme, because I made a video about it titled How One Man Ruined Defense in the NFL, talking about the Fangio-inspired schemes around the league and why they aren't working. So if you are new to this channel, or if you have not seen that video, please pause this video, go watch it. I genuinely believe it is maybe the most well-produced video I've ever made, but also one of the best takes I've ever had. We saw several defensive coordinators that I put on blast in that video end up getting fired. So I cannot stress enough, if you're a Cardinals fan, you want to know what the scheme's going to look like, why there are concerns about this system, I'm really proud of that work, and I encourage you to go check it out. And a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about was just covered better in that video. I had more time to do it, and I was focused on it. So I will leave that there, but make a couple of the keynotes here. I get the idea of a Fangio-style defense where you want to play bend, don't break in this era of explosive plays, the passing game. You want to play 2 safeties, rotate them to try to confuse these quarterbacks, force turnovers, force them to beat you through the ground and underneath, and make 12 good throws on an individual drive instead of 3 really good ones. I get the idea of it, but it worked for a couple years in the NFL. But very, very quickly, the offensive minds and the quarterbacks in the league that these schemes were trying to attack, they just evolved. Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, they just started attacking underneath. And we also have seen now, it's not a coincidence, that last year the NFL witnessed the largest yards per carry that the league has ever seen, because so many teams think this is the way you're supposed to play defense in 2023. The reality is, for most of these teams, it's just not working. Minnesota, Green Bay, Cleveland, those defenses sucked. They way overachieved. because of this defensive approach, which essentially it's a coward's way of playing defense. It just is. You aren't playing physical defense. You don't play defense like you want to play defense, and I hate it. And I don't think it works around the league. Now, with Jonathan Gannon, he had much more success running this system than those teams we've previously mentioned. But I think you got to ask why. Does it have anything to do with the fact that he had the deepest, most talented D-line in the NFL and 2 great cornerbacks on the back end to help out? Probably. And it's not like this defense was insanely good last year. They definitely had moments where it's like, why are you playing nickel defense quarters with off coverage on 3rd and 1? He still did it. And to me, if you're a defensive head coach in the league and you're just gifting first downs to other teams, what is it that you do here? Now, again, I'm rooting for Jonathan Gannon. I think he did show a little bit more diversification than, some of those other teams, a little bit more willingness to go man coverage, but it wasn't a lot. And you could even counter by saying he ran less stunts than any defense in the league last year, which to me shows a lack of needing to innovate and be creative. We'll see. We really will see. But again, I'm very skeptical about the hiring here. And it's nothing against Jonathan Gannon. I think he's qualified. I think he seems like a great dude, and I hope he balls out. But I really think he's up against it, trying to run the system he wants to run. And, with this defensive staff or this roster that we're going to talk about. Now, I really hope I'm wrong and this defense starts to show great signs here in year 1, because Nick Rallis, man, I'm pulling for him. Played against him in high school at Edina. He's my age, graduated the same year. Minnesota boy, born and raised. So let's go, Nick. Prove me wrong, man. I really hope that these two guys can really craft a good defense here. But the analyst in me is skeptical that this is going to work. I'm just being honest about that. It is what it is. Now, offensively, I think Drew Petzing is a sound, logical hire. He's a Kevin Stefanski guy. I have a lot of respect for Kevin Stefanski as a offensive mind, because he's a guy that has, he just kept staying in Minnesota, Stefanski, under a bunch of different coordinators, and he learned every single scheme in the book. Now, he really fell in love with the Shanahan-style scheme working under Pat Shurmur back in 2017, where Petzing was with him for that. So these guys have, they've been together for a while, and you're going to expect the same approach here for Arizona, where they're going to come out and probably run a lot of wide zone blocking stuff. They're going to really use that as a base to stem into play action shot plays. So the kind of typical Shanahan stuff. But Stefanski has gotten very diverse and multiple with his run game, especially since he got to Cleveland. He'll go pin and pull, he'll go counter, and they've had one of the most difficult run games to defend in their time in Cleveland. So I like the scheme fit here. The one big thing to note here, because you can really run whatever you want with Kyler Murray, especially in the run game. But one thing to really keep an eye out on here is, I love Kyler and we're going to talk about him, but his biggest weakness is probably attacking the middle of the field off of play action. And if you're going to put him under center and do the Shanahan stuff where you want him to fake the handoff, snap that head around, and attack the field, attack the middle of the field on a deep crosser on time, that's probably the worst part of Kyler Murray's game. And this is something that Deshaun Watson really struggled with when he arrived in Cleveland. I talked about this being a potential concern last year and for Watson, and same deal with Kyler. It's going to be something to keep an eye on if and when he gets in there, is how well does that kind of scheme match the skill set of Kyler Murray, and is that an area of Kyler Murray's game that really, once he's now asked to do that stuff more often, can he do it? Because it wasn't really a big part of the Cliff Kingsbury Big 12 spread offense, believe it or not. So one change I made to this series this year is we're just ranking these coaching staffs into tiers now instead of 1 through 32. And, I kind of shredded Gannon, but he is a well-qualified defensive coach. He's going to be in that tier 3 of good defensive minds right away with a chance to prove me wrong, I suppose, and improve that this year. And then with the offensive staff, it's just very unproven. Drew Petzing, I don't believe, has ever called plays or orchestrated his own offense. And it's going to be a whole new staff coming in that they're just going to have to figure things out and learn together. Any new staff, it's very difficult to rank them very highly because there's just so much for these guys to figure out, and that's going to be a big part of this Cardinals 2023 season. It just is what it is, and I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of disagreement on that. Now, before we get into the players here, I got to tell you guys about Underdog Fantasy, where if you enjoy football, if you enjoy fantasy sports, you will love Underdog Fantasy, who has really revolutionized fantasy football in two ways. Number one is their daily pick'em contest that I am obsessed with. You can do this not just for football, but for all sports. I've been doing this at all the Twins games that I go to, but you're setting lineups anywhere from 2 to 5 picks, selecting player props. So that's fantasy points, touchdowns, passing yards, you name it. You can even pit players against each other to see who's going to do better. And if your picks hit, you can get up to 20 to 1 odds. Do a $2 lineup that pays $40. So it's a cheap way to get you more involved in whatever game you're watching with massive payouts. So I love their daily pick'em contests, but also Best Ball, where right now Underdog is king, man. Their Best Ball Mania competition is the biggest fantasy football competition of all time. What's the best part of fantasy football? It's draft day, right? It's like Christmas, man. You get together with your friends and family league and all that. Well, now you can just have that on demand right now by playing Best Ball Fantasy, and it's set it and forget it. No weekly transactions, no trades. It's all about how well you drafted, and it will set the best lineup for you based on how your players played each week. I have loved doing Best Ball. I've done 4 Best Ball Mania competitions. I finally got one with Bijan Robinson, which I'm stoked about. He's going to be my number 1 player for fantasy this year, I think. And yeah, you guys are going to love either Best Ball and or Pick'em. And right now, if you sign up using promo code TFG at Underdog Fantasy, they will match up to $100 on your first deposit. That's $100 of free play using promo code TFG, and you'll support my channel in the process. But let's get back to it. And we're going to now dive into this roster and start with the passing game and notably the quarterback conversation here in Arizona. And it's a tough one, right? Like, we just don't know. We don't know who's playing and for how long, but I do want to shout out Kyler Murray, first and foremost, who, I know this sounds takey because this is the first deep dive, and some of you might be like, oh, he's just trying to have a hot take to get the series off to a good start. No, like, I genuinely believe Kyler Murray is currently the most underrated player in the entire National Football League. Just think about the narrative on Kyler right now. It's, he can't see the field, he's a bust, he's too short, he's injury prone, all he wants to do is play Call of Duty, as if Kyler Murray didn't come into this horrible Cardinals organization, take them to a playoff, was a front runner for MVP just a season ago, earned a massive contract extension here. The worst thing I've seen that has pissed me off to no end is people were using Kyler Murray as an example for why Bryce Young was going to be a bust at the next level. And I'm like, why are we rewriting history here on Kyler Murray? Is it because of all of the Call of Duty jokes? I just don't understand. Kyler Murray has been nothing but a top 10 quarterback in the NFL over the last 2 years when healthy. And sure, you don't like to see him tear his ACL on a non-contact injury last year. It sucks. He's going to have to come back from it. But he's a game-changing player. If he were to start the whole season healthy, which I do not expect, but if he were, there's no way the Cardinals rank 32nd. He's done nothing but elevate this offense, elevate the playmakers around him, and, kind of put this team on his back many times. Is he a perfect passer? No. He'll have some mistakes. He does struggle to see the middle of the field, which I mentioned earlier with the scheme fit. That's why he's my 8th ranked quarterback and not, Joe Burrow. But the Kyler Murray hate has to stop. And the whole conversation on the Cardinals right now is Caleb Williams is a Cardinal. We're going to do that already. That is incredibly disrespectful to Kyler Murray. in my opinion. And if they do go that route, which I'm not saying is impossible, someone is going to get very lucky to be able to acquire Kyler Murray. So I got to stick my neck out for Kyler, who, like I said, I think is genuinely the most underrated player in the entire National Football League. And for that reason, I really hope he comes back and can start earlier than people expect. One of the big things that comes to my mind is Joe Burrow, who tore his ACL in his rookie season right around the same time that Kyler Murray did. I think it might have been a couple weeks before when Kyler did. But, Burrow came in and took the Bengals to a Super Bowl in the year after coming off of that ACL injury. Now, it's a little bit different because Kyler's mobility is such a big part of his game. Kyler is not the surgeon from inside the pocket that Joe Burrow is, even if I think he's underrated in that regard. So they are going to be very smart, especially considering, they're not going to be competing for a Super Bowl this year, no matter how healthy Kyler Murray is. So to me, it's really about making sure that he is 100% and the re-injury risk and everything is good to go. And I just don't think that's going to be available week 1. Now, is it week 5, week 6? I think it's very possible. And you talk about like best ball in Underdog Fantasy, Kyler Murray's going in like the 13th round right now. Like, yeah, give me that, dude, because you can survive your fantasy league for like 5 weeks. Kyler Murray is going to be having to score a ass load of points because this defense is going to be terrible. And if he can get back and run, that's a lot of value added there. So that's probably enough time spent on a guy that maybe doesn't even play this year. That's the big question, right? And if he doesn't, they do rank 32nd in the NFL. They are in backup territory immediately, where it's, Colt McCoy. Don't even really need to analyze him. He's a good backup, but he is what he is. He's that guy that lacks physical talent, but can see the field well and, play point guard and distribute the ball in the short to intermediate game. But there's just such a cap on what the upside of the offense is going to look like with a guy like Colt McCoy. Then you got David Blau, who I don't know if this is a take or not, but I think he is my prediction to be the day 1 starter for this team. You watch his game against the Atlanta Falcons, his one full start last year for this team. Pretty damn good, honestly. Was really impressed with how he saw the field and made some big throws in that game. I thought he moved pretty well in the pocket. I don't know. It's just one game, and he's been very up and down throughout his career. But this was the first time, when he was starting games for Detroit, there was a lot of people kind of pounding the table for him. And I pushed back on it then. But I don't know. I saw some growth in that start. Now, he came back the next week against the Niners and ended up playing quite poorly. So I'm not trying to go too far here with David Blau, but he's going to be my prediction with Colt McCoy still trying to get healthy, getting hurt at the end of last year. David Blau, I think, could potentially win a game for this team, maybe, depending, who they're playing. Buy some time for the team. That's maybe even an optimistic outlook, but I'm just saying, he was pretty damn good against the Atlanta Falcons last year. I was impressed, and I think that's the reason he's back, as opposed to, like, Trace McSorley, who started a game last year and was just, David Blau looked like an NFL backup. Trace McSorley looked like he needed to go play in the Arena League. But then you also have Clayton Tune, who this team spent a 5th-round pick on. A lot of Cardinals fans are going to say, just throw Clayton Tune out there and let's see what he can do. I get it, It's just a 5th-round pick. If he can play, that's great. There is a downside to that, though. Throwing a guy out there that probably isn't ready in a potentially really bad situation, like, you can ruin a guy's confidence, not just in himself and how he can play on the field, but also in the coaching staff's confidence in a guy. Like, it might be best for Clayton Tune to be QB3 in year 1. But if he starts, it will be interesting. He's really athletic. He's got a pretty good arm, really creative playmaker on the move. But he's a true first read and run quarterback. Not much, pocket presence or ability to hang in the pocket and survey the field in his tape at Houston. So I would be more saying David Blau over Clayton Tune. But if you're getting into Jeff Driscoll territory, maybe I'd play Clayton Tune. I don't know if Driscoll's going to make the team. He started a bunch of games because he is athletic and has a big arm, but I don't know. He's on the roster. I think he's going to be the first man out of this group. So, yeah, they rank anywhere from 8th to 32nd at quarterback this year. A massive spectrum, and obviously is going to be a big cloud over this team's season. But ultimately, I think, despite all the Caleb Williams talk, there's still very much reason to believe that Kyler Murray can be a borderline elite quarterback for the Arizona Cardinals into the future for this team. His stock is about as low as I think it ever will be. I'm a big believer in his game. And I think a lot of Cardinals fans will be happy to hear somebody actually defend this guy, because he's been just getting put on blast now since his contract extension that had the Call of Duty clause in it. And with that, I am repping the Kyler Murray Size Matters Not merch. Cardinals fans, if you enjoy this, if you are looking forward to Kyler making a comeback at some point this year, it's my favorite piece of merch right now, and excited for Kyler to get back, because unfortunately he got hurt like 2 weeks after I dropped it. But thatfranchisestore.com, you can support the channel. You can get some sweet merch. We got all sorts of stuff there. If you don't want this, go check out the other stuff. Again, thatfranchisestore.com. But let's talk about the weaponry here, which also has a major question mark about it, and that is DeAndre Hopkins, who I think probably, like I said in the intro, I think probably does get traded here, and that creates a huge spectrum on how this team is going to rank in terms of receiving weaponry. It goes all the way from 12th with a full season of DeAndre Hopkins to 25th without it. And it's tough because he's another guy that's underrated. When he's played over the last 2 years, people forget how damn good he is. He's still a top 5 to 7 receiver in the NFL. Now, he's missed a lot of games lately because of the suspension and the injury over the last 2 years. But what is he, 30 going on 31? Maybe just turned 31. He still has a couple of good years in him. And if they do happen to work things out, if they're not getting the trade capital and they can convince him to stay, and, Kyler comes back week 3, there's a world where this is a much better offense than we're painting right now, because Kyler and DeAndre Hopkins have a phenomenal chemistry together, both when the play breaks down, but also on back shoulders. And, it really is a thing of beauty. This is one of the better quarterback receiver combos in the league that certainly doesn't get enough discussion. So, as a Cardinals fan, I would want to just keep DeAndre Hopkins, because I don't know if a team's going to give up a second-round pick for him. If they do, you probably make the move. You're in a rebuild. But I don't know if that's going to happen. I would rather keep DeAndre Hopkins than give him to a good team that's only going to get better if they get DeAndre Hopkins for a third-round pick, right? Like, that's a 100th pick in the draft. Whatever. Just keep DeAndre Hopkins around and help build up this offense. But obviously, if he's gone, you've got some questions. You have Marquise Brown, who's really good at what he is, right? He is a true deep threat. Take the top off the defense and force them to keep the top on from a schematic point of view. When he's on the field, he's a numbers changer. That safety is going to have to stay basically 20 yards downfield, and that is a huge weapon to open things up for everybody else. But the second he becomes your number one, that really changes the scope of everything. Honestly, another reason to just keep DeAndre Hopkins. Maybe in time, Michael Wilson can be that sort of X receiver for you, but you can't have Marquise Brown be your X receiver. He can't run the full route tree against every sort of corner, right? He's a slender player. If he deals with, the Sauce Gardners, the Jalen Ramseys of the world, which those players are busy dealing with DeAndre Hopkins, he's going to get banged down the field. You don't have to have that true, safety presence over the top, because you can trust your corner to be stride for stride with him a little bit better. Marquise Brown much better as a flanker and a complementary piece, even if he's maybe the best in the league at being that guy right now. And then beyond him, you don't have a lot of solid options right now, or at least good options. You have some players that are interesting for sure, but it's pretty much all unproven. Rondale Moore, who had a hard time staying healthy last year, he can play, man. I've always been a Rondale Moore guy. I even had a late first-round grade on him when he came out. I would love to see a Rondale Moore breakout season in this offense. Get him even more involved on jet sweeps and creative ways to get him the ball other than just throwing him bubble screens, which Cliff Kingsbury did to death. You can be even more creative than that and get him open on these crossing routes off of play action in this system, I think is really where he could get opened up. His run after catch ability borders on the elite. I've always said he's baby Saquon with the ball in his hands because he's so athletic, and not just athletic, but he's, unlike Marquise Brown, he's thick. He can break tackles and really convert into a running back after the catch. So I've been sitting around waiting on a Rondale Moore breakout season. I would love for it to happen, but it's very much TBD here in year 3, as he is kind of a unique skill set. Then you have Greg Dortch, who I guess if you just took the middle ground of Rondale Moore and Marquise Brown, that's Greg Dortch. He's fast. He's a good route runner. He's pretty good with the ball in his hands. I don't think there's room for 3 small wide receivers in the world where DeAndre Hopkins gets traded. Like, I don't want to trot out 3 5'9" wide receivers, right? But as a backup to either of those players, I think he makes sense, especially as a backup to Rondale Moore, which we saw last year. But he really can play, man. If he was 6 foot, 190 pounds, he'd be a true, starting wide receiver on the outside. He just, he's got those catch radius issues. He's got those size issues. But his tape's pretty good, man. He's a fun player. I just don't know if he makes a ton of sense behind Brown and Moore, or at least with them. And that's why you bring in a Zach Pascal, who is the complete opposite of all those players. I like the complementary addition there to get in a guy that's regarded as one of the best run-blocking receivers in the NFL, a good big-bodied guy on the outside. If Michael Wilson can't go, who we're going to talk about here, I think Pascal can be a serviceable X, so to speak, with this skill set you have here, but nothing overly explosive, not a big separator type. But then you have Michael Wilson, who was one of my favorite players in this entire draft class. I think they stole him where they got him. I had a true second-round grade on Michael Wilson. They got him in the 3rd. And part of that might be because of that is because of the injury concerns. He just missed a lot of time with ankle injuries and stuff at Stanford, but his tape was as good as any receiver in this draft class, honestly. The route running, the ability to create after the catch. He's big and strong, and specifically the release off the line of scrimmage is I don't say this lightly. He had some of the best release grade. I should reword that. One of the best release grades I've given to a college receiver over the last few years. I hesitantly compared him to Diet Devontae Adams because Devontae, who came into the league as a 6th-round pick, moves like him, releases off the line of scrimmage like him, is literally the same size, 6'1", 215 pounds. Devontae had some drop issues coming into the league as well, just like we've seen pop up on Michael Wilson's tape. I'm not saying he's going to be Devontae Adams, but he is what Devontae Adams was as that 2nd-round pick coming out of Fresno State. So we'll see. I think there is upside for him to be, honestly, the perfect complement down the road to Marquise Brown and Rondale Moore. But that's why I like trying to keep DeAndre Hopkins around, because you don't have to have Michael Wilson be that guy right away. You can give him a year to come into that role and to show you that he can stay healthy. I think they probably stick with those 6, Auden Tate, given the fact that they don't have a lot of size with this receiving group. They might keep a 7th there. He's had some good seasons for the Bengals as that big-bodied guy on the outside. So, another guy that would probably rotate with Zach Pascal as an X if he makes this team. Javon Wims is going to have to fight his way onto this team, if you get that reference. And then that'll probably round out the receiving group there. I like the tight end room as well. Zach Ertz, another underrated player. Now, he's coming off the injury. He is getting up there in age and probably heading in the wrong direction, but man, his tape is still really good from last year. He still is an excellent route runner in the short to intermediate part of the field, incredibly consistent hands. If you're excited about the Bills getting Dalton Kincaid, Zach Ertz is still everything Dalton Kincaid is, and probably a little bit more in terms of winning contested catch stuff. So, they have that player here on the team. My comp for Dalton Kincaid was Zach Ertz. If he can get back healthy, that probably helps this group. Like, I rank them 25th without DeAndre Hopkins. If Zach Ertz is back fully healthy, which is a question mark, he had a knee injury last year, and at his age, you just don't know for sure. But if he is 100%, this is probably a little bit better than that 25th grade I gave him there. But Trey McBride, once Zach Ertz went down, showed that he can play. Now, he's not the same player in terms of route running and consistent ability to win those tough catches. But man, he wins in his own ways. He is a much better blocker, which we'll talk about. But as far as this scheme is concerned, they are going to run a lot of 12 personnel. These Shanahan offenses always do. So there's going to be much more room for both of these guys to be on the field than there was in Cliff Kingsbury's system. And McBride is much more of your typical Shanahan style tight end, where he's got straight line speed, can really pull away on crossing routes. He can block in line. And, these guys are probably going to split workload no matter how healthy Zach Ertz is. So he's certainly a breakout candidate for this season. I'm excited for him because it was always just kind of a weird fit with Cliff Kingsbury's offense where, Cliff wants to be out there spread out in like 4 wide. McBride is more of that, full inline tight end. And you can do a little bit of both with both these guys. So it's a really nice combination there. McBride started slow last year, so you want to be a little bit hesitant on him, but I think the flashes were absolutely there as the year went on. And, this could really, there is a world where Marquise Brown, Rondale Moore, Michael Wilson, and Trey McBride is a really nice foursome for Kyler Murray into the future. Is it going to be all available and ready right away with a new coach, Kyler's injury, a couple of these guys coming off of injuries of their own, with DeAndre Hopkins still maybe hanging around? It's just very muddy right now, but I like the room for the future. Really not a tight end after Trey McBride even worth discussing. We'll see which of these guys takes that tight end 3 spot. Probably Noah Togiai, but I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine on that one. And then the running backs. James Conner, for what it's worth, a really skilled receiving back. Now, he's not going to peel away from guys on routes. He's not going to really be super explosive after the catch and, give you these 50-yard chunk plays. But if you want to talk about catching a screen, running an out route, or even throwing like contested balls to, or a check down, like, he's got great hands. A couple drops, uncharacteristic drops showed up last year, but throughout his career, he's had really good hands. He's instinctive. He's a tough guy to tackle in space because he is so big. And he's a very effective receiving back. And I think in his own way is underrated for that specific part of his game. And I think especially with a backup quarterback in there, he's probably going to be catching 4, maybe 5 passes a game. I think he can get you 30, 40 receiving yards a game. Like, he's paid a lot of money here too. So like, he's going to be a high workload back. He's shown not just in Arizona, but in Pittsburgh that he can handle it. So he's not the most dynamic player, but from a production standpoint, I actually think he's going to have a pretty good year in both phases. And we will revisit the running backs as runners momentarily, but beyond him, Keontae Ingram, kind of the opposite, right? He has all of the physical tools, and those show up. He had a massive play against the Saints where, he showed what he showed at USC, really, where, he was really good at the receiving game at USC with his jump cut, which is like the one good thing about Keontae Ingram, is he has that kind of, Reggie Bush-esque jump cut in space. Everything else is still coming along, but, you pair that with his athleticism, he can be a much better receiving back this year than he was last year, and potentially a compliment to James Conner. They're putting a lot of confidence in him to be that guy, because beyond that, it's Corey Clement, who's been a jack of all trades, third running back guy around the league, does a little bit of everything. Tyson Williams, who looked like the next guy in Baltimore for like 2 games, and then they just forgot about him. And then DeMercado, who was the other guy next to Kendre Miller at TCU. It's really probably the worst running back depth in the NFL. But James Conner's pretty solid. So I won't be splitting it up like this for every team, but given the unique circumstances with Kyler and DeAndre Hopkins, anywhere from 25th to 12th with the weaponry, anywhere from dead last to 8th with the quarterback. I'll also show what that means for their overall offensive rank later on here. But let's talk about the offensive line. You could do worse, but you could certainly do a lot better. I think this group is much better in pass protection than they are as run blockers. They rank 20th in pass pro, which it's not horrible. Like, you can get by with that. But as a run blocking group, 30th. So DJ Humphries is still their left tackle, even though they drafted Paris Johnson Jr. Someone that might be on the trade block, but also, like, I'm not going to be in, if I'm Monty Ossenfort, clearly making an effort to become more physical as a team, I'm certainly, the first thing on my mind is not giving away good offensive linemen. DJ Humphries is a very good offensive lineman. Dealt with some injuries last year, but probably the best year he's had as a pass protector. I think he's really shown developments in that part of his game that has held him back throughout his career, but a very good run blocker, really nasty puller. So, like, I really like what they have in him. He was a team captain last year. I'm certainly not in a rush to give him away, but if someone wants to overpay for him, you just drafted Paris Johnson, who can be a left tackle for you. It's an option, but I don't mind putting him next to Paris Johnson, who was a guard just a year ago at Ohio State. I think Paris eventually, whether he's replacing DJ Humphrey or potentially Kelvin Beachum, would be like honestly an ideal situation in a year maybe as a tackle. That's what you drafted him to play. But for now, it's not like he has to learn a new position. He's done it before. He's shown he can play left or right. He said in an interview that he's willing to play guard, and he's just a great dude. And I think this is, if you want to just have the best offensive line for you right now, I like what he can do for you at left guard. To me, Paris Johnson was an underrated, a lot of underrated opinions on this Cardinals team. It's kind of funny. We'll see if that plays out as a team, not just as these players. But, Paris Johnson reminded me a lot of Andrew Thomas coming out of Georgia, in the same way that he didn't get enough credit for how athletic he was, how nasty he was as a run blocker, and had very similar deficiencies as a pass protector, in that I felt like he could add 5 to 10 functional muscle, which is going to happen for a 21-year-old guy, and just had to learn how to better use his feet to cut off inside moves. Beyond that, he's a freak, man. He truly has all-pro potential as a tackle, 36.5-inch arms. I thought they navigated this draft perfectly. If they took him at 3, I would have still given it an A. I really felt like he was that good of a prospect. Was often placed at 9 to Chicago, and I'm like, he should probably go sooner than that, honestly. So, love what you have there. At center, it's going to be a competition. Cardinals fans would love if John Gaines could win this. We'll see. I think it's probably Hjalti Froholt at center, who kind of broke out for the Browns last year in his own kind of way, was drafted mid-rounds by the Patriots several years ago. Didn't end up making the team there, but in that Browns system, that's the one hesitation with Froholt. And obviously you have the Cleveland staff coming over, so they know what they have in him, but they have really been plug and play with those centers in Cleveland. And I don't know if it's going to necessarily apply. Now, it's nice that it's the same system, right? So I'm cautiously optimistic, at least as a run blocker, where he was really good for Cleveland. If he ends up one-on-one as a pass protector, you might have some issues there. Slower feet, not as great with his hands, all that. But, for your worst pass protector to be your center, you can get by with that because they're almost always working on double teams or picking up blitzers, right? So it's not that big of a deal. But teams can do stuff to isolate him and expose him. So that's going to be your main red flag for the pass protection. But I think he'll be a pretty good run blocker for them. And then Will Hernandez, they bring him back, was totally fine last year. I was dialing up the 3 games of tape I try to do for every team before each deep dive. And I was kind of waiting to see Will Hernandez be bad. And I kept watching him. And it's not like he didn't really have a whole lot of dominating wins or anything, but he's just, the way I describe him, he's just a moving rock. He's not getting to spaces super quickly. He's not sliding left to right very well, but he's good with his arms, and he's a smart player. He's started a million games in this league, so like he's fine at right guard. Not the best athlete for wide zone blocking, so that could be a pretty big issue for them. And If he's really struggling, that's where you start to think about, okay, can Josh Jones come in and play guard? Elijah Wilkinson, who was a good run blocker for Atlanta's wide zone blocking scheme last year. John Gaines. Does Marquise Hayes have a year or two renewal? There's some options to maybe try out, but it's going to be Hernandez right away. And then Kelvin Beachum at right tackle, perennially one of the most underrated pass protectors in the league. He is the weirdest looking offensive lineman. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that every time I talk about Kelvin Beachum. He's 6'3", completely loaded though. And like 2/3 of him is in his legs. For those that watch Tyler Steen at Philadelphia, Kelvin Beachum reminded me a lot of Tyler Steen or vice versa. But just he's really sound in pass protection. He will lose. He's not the best athlete because of his weird body distribution. His upper body is an easy lever against power rushers. That's something you'll notice. Like good power rushers, when they stick their hands inside, he very quickly, topples over and loses that anchor. But it's not that he's functionally weak. So he's good in that department. There's a reason Paris Johnson is not playing right tackle. It's because Kelvin Beachum's a very sound player. I don't like that he called out Kyler Murray. I think that could lead to some potential locker room stuff that just kind of rubs me the wrong way. So maybe Kelvin Beachum would be someone who would look to trade instead of DJ Humphries. But it's also worth noting Josh Jones played really well last year, a third-round pick 3 years ago, who was kind of flirted as a potential first-round guy, was probably more of a day 2 guy that fell to day 3 and struggled for the first couple of years, but got to play left tackle last year, his natural position, when DJ Humphries went down, and he was pretty good. I thought his foot technique looked much improved. His hand usage is really good, but I still think he needs to add functional play strength in the weight room, and is a big reason he's not slated to start right now. But in a wide zone front 5 blocking scheme, it could actually be a really good scheme fit change for him. And they certainly are not going to just give up on Josh Jones in a contract year for him. So if he gets on the field, we'll definitely be kind of all eyes on him to see. It's a big year for him because he could really emerge as a quality starter for Arizona or for somebody else. And I think he could do it at 4 different positions. But is that opportunity going to come for him? I don't know. I guess the last thing I didn't cover is that Kelvin Beachum is not the best run blocker at right tackle. He really isn't. He's not a phenomenal athlete. So if they want to go stretch run, it's probably going to be the left side, because between Will Hernandez and Kelvin Beachum, it's kind of an issue, honestly, as far as reaching wide alignments and climbing to the second level. It's going to be, and especially with James Conner, who's not a fast running back, it's going to be a kind of interesting clash of existing talent for a different scheme paired now with a new scheme. So just something to keep an eye on, Cardinals fans, as far as what they're going to be looking for at those positions. I don't know if Hernandez and Beachum are really it long-term, but they're older players anyway, so it's not a big deal. Any other depth worth talking about? John Gaines will be interesting, right? Like they clearly want these athletes up front, and Gaines was an awesome athlete, is an awesome athlete, and a decent player at UCLA. I thought he was a little bit early in the 4th round when they took him, but he's going to have a chance to compete for work at some point this year. As far as the skill player blockers are concerned, it's not a great group. We don't spend a whole lot of time talking about it. It's more there just as a note for you. As far as who the good blockers are, I do like adding Zach Pascal. They can kind of put him closer to the line of scrimmage, and he can even block like linebackers at times. He's really physical. Maybe the best run blocking receiver in the NFL. So that was a fun addition. It's just, how often is he going to be on the field? Not too often, right? So temper your expectations for that. But yeah, there's your offensive line. And then with the rushing threats for the run game, there's not a ton to really say. I mean, we know who James Conner is. He's a physical runner, fights for tough yardage, really good short yardage guy. I love his balance of knowing when to bounce things outside. There's a lot of, more explosive players that don't bounce runs outside as well as he does, and at the right time, because you don't want to be too bouncy. And I think that's a big problem with Keontae Ingram, is the second he doesn't see a wide open hole, he's like, all right, I'll just jump cut to the outside. James Conner understands the numbers, and situationally when it's a good idea to bounce to the outside. And he's really good at, stiff arming that slot corner. And if he can get through that guy, he's going to, round the edge for a 10-yard gain. So really crafty player, cancer survivor, one of the more likable players in the league. Giving him the contract he got was an egregious decision by the former front office. But, like I said, I think he's going to be a productive player. I think with this room, unless they go out and acquire somebody else, I expect him to be a 1,000-yard rusher and pick up, at least a few hundred receiving yards, if not considerably more. So probably someone that I'm targeting in fantasy football. I can't imagine he's getting drafted all that high. But when I look at this room, I'm not a big Keontae Ingram guy. I mentioned how bouncy he is. I didn't love his tape at USC. I thought he was a little bit overdrafted when they took him. He wasn't good as a rookie. Corey Clement's not a threat. Tyson Williams, maybe. This is James Conner's backfield, man. I think he's a solid back. I ranked them 24th with him as the workhorse. How many teams have true workhorse backs? Not a lot. So they're fine. It's nothing too exciting, but I don't think it's a huge issue for them either, right? And then we also do this QB run multiplier, and this is, again, very tough with Kyler Murray. They're tied for third in the league for me in terms of rushing threat. I think they might be a little bit more cautious with him in terms of total usage with him coming off that ACL injury, but still, obviously, what he does as a runner opens up everything for this rushing game. And they'd be stupid, if you're not going to tap into what Kyler Murray does in the read option game, in the speed option game, running out of empty, out of shotgun, if you're not going to tap into that, just trade Kyler Murray, because while he's a good passer, it's what he brings with his feet that truly makes him a special guy worth paying. Now, if he's not in there, it's hard to know even who's going to be starting and what to do with that quarterback run multiplier. But I will say if it's Driscoll or Tune, I would imagine they would get them involved as runners because they're very good at that as well. So the offense overall with Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins ranks 20th for me. And a big part of the, holdback there would be the coaching. Just they've got to prove what they can do. But if the coaching really figures things out and you get these guys back healthy, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility for the second half of this team's season to honestly be a really good offense, and them shatter this 32nd overall team ranking by the second half of the year. It's just there's so many questions coming into the year. You can't rank them too high. But with Kyler and these receivers and this offensive line, and if the play calling proves to be pretty good, this can be a really annoying offense to deal with, and an offense that, no matter how bad this defense is, can win them some games. Now, if they're really patient with Kyler, and we don't see Kyler until the last third of the year, and they do trade DeAndre Hopkins, the floor is literally as low as it gets. 32nd in the league with a backup quarterback in there, with an unproven coaching staff, unproven receiving group, mediocre offensive line. The range of outcomes for this offense are vast, and I'm very curious to see how that all plays out. Now, as we shift to the defensive side of the ball, I don't think the range of outcomes is all that wide. There's not a defense in the league. There's one. There's one defense that's a little close that's going to be coming in the next few videos. But this is the worst defense in the NFL, and as we get into this roster, you'll start to see why. Starting with the defensive line, this is not an NFL caliber unit. It's just not, especially on the interior. Rashad Lawrence, I like his first step. He's a flashy player out of LSU, declared as a young player. And I thought I think I had an up arrow on him last year. And maybe I could consider doing that again, but coming off the injury, it's going to be tough. But, the injury was hard on him. He played 4 games last year, but he was good in those 4 or 6 games that he did play. And I do believe in him. I think he's their best interior player right now, which is not saying much. But the opportunity for him is huge this year. So Instead of giving him that up arrow, I think maybe he's more of a eyes emote kind of guy. Like, keep an eye on him. I think he could surprise some people, but the probability of that isn't super high. The main reason I say it is he has no idea what he's doing as a pass rusher. He's got great tools to be a good bull rusher. He just has never been able to put it all together, even last year. So it's got to come if he's going to be a full-time starter. But again, the tools are there. Leki Fotu next to him, like, I don't even give him an NFL level grade as a pass rusher. He is such an abysmal athlete, and that has its drawbacks as a run defender as well. He's a high energy, high effort, high play strength kind of guy. As a rotational fourth or fifth piece for somebody, sure, maybe, but like, he probably doesn't even make the team on a lot of NFL rosters, and he's their slated starter on the inside right now. It's going to be a massive rotation with the interior group. They signed LJ Collier. Like, really? That's your big free agent move on the D-line? He's horrible. He's one of the worst first-round busts in the last decade. He can't defend the run, and he doesn't know what he's doing as a pass rusher. So he's going to play, but that's not good. Kevin Strong, Carlos Watkins, a couple guys that were rotational pieces for their respective teams last year. You could do worse than those guys as fourth, fifth guys off the bench, I suppose. But nobody there is going to emerge as a starter. And that's why, like, drafting Dante Stills is really interesting. Another spot where it's like, if he went anywhere else, you're probably like, okay, he's not going to play year one. He's going to have to learn how to play as an interior player at the next level after playing edge at West Virginia. But here, he's going to have to play at some point. So I'm curious, how does he do? He's a tweener, like I said. He doesn't have great play strength as an interior piece. I like him, though, as a 4-eye when they do, want to come out in different, various multiple fronts, if you will. I think there's a spot for Dante Stills to turn into a decent rotational player. Thrusting him into action right away, I think, is a recipe for potential disaster. I don't know how well he's going to hold up, but he does have some nice rush moves. He's a persistent rusher. He's a high-energy run defender, and when they played him on the edge at West Virginia, he was actually really freaking good out there. But obviously, that role is going to change now, and when he was slid inside at West Virginia, it certainly was not as pretty. So we'll see what they get from him. They have some other bodies on the roster as well. Jonathan Ledbetter played a ton for them last year, but for me, it's like, man, Dante Stills can at least be Jonathan Ledbetter. You might as well just play Stills and see what you have there. I'm not sure Ledbetter makes the team or not. So obviously that interior group is laughable. And then you get to the edge, and at least some guys I like. BJ Ojulari was a great second-round pick. Loved him in that spot. I think long-term I see him as a potential number 2 guy. I love how he breaks out all of the stops as a pass rusher. He's the full pass rushing tool belt, the whole pass rushing textbook, if you will. He'll do spins, ghost moves, underrated as a bull rusher. So I do expect him to be their best rusher in year one. He's going to play a lot. I think he's going to, be hit or miss because he was at LSU. He lacks a little bit of play strength, and while he tries a million different moves, they aren't always effective, right? But I think he can only get better at each individual move. I don't like him as a run defender. Like I said, he lacks some of that play strength. He doesn't anchor very well. But I think you'll live with it, given all of the other deficiencies on this defensive line. And then Cam Thomas. I like Cam Thomas. I do. He was impressive to me in his rookie tape. I thought he was overdrafted in the third round, but ultimately I think he's fine in the third round as a rotational third guy. He doesn't have those high-end tools to really be a full-time starter, and eventually you're going to want to replace him with a true starter on the edge here, but he's probably going to be a pretty productive player there, maybe 35, 40 pressures, 6 sacks, a bunch of tackles. He's really crafty. He's kind of got that slow burn approach, which plays both as a pass rusher and as a run defender, where he's really good at distancing himself with his hands, quick feet for a bigger edge, and decent bend to just kind of work in and around blocks. So I expect him to be their number 2, but it's going to be a big rotation with those two guys. And then Myjai Sanders, who showed some good flashes as well last year. Both Cam Thomas and Myjai Sanders have fairly similar rushing styles, like I just described, where, they know they're not going to overwhelm you with power, but what they can do is work angles and use their length and hand usage and contact balance to kind of navigate their way to the quarterback. So, both guys are fine as edge 3, edge 4 pieces, but you don't have anybody you're afraid of on this group, right? Unless BJ Ojulari stuns in year 1. It's going to be a lot of these 3, which I don't mind. I'd rather have a number 1, but I don't mind these 3 for where the Cardinals are right now. And then, Dennis Gardick, Victor Demukajay, Jesse Lukita, those guys are edge 4, edge 5 pieces. They're in the right spot respectively. And some of these guys will play, some of them won't make the team. It's not going to ultimately make much of a difference. So they do rank 32nd, both in run defense and pass rush for the defensive line. They've got some work to do here. They know it. We all know it. Opposing teams will know it. It's going to get ugly this year. It just is. You can't fix everything right away. Steve Keim left this group in a bad way, especially after 3 guys left, right? J.J. Watt retires, Zach Allen leaves, and Marcus Golden's not on the roster. Gets a little bit better into the second level, which you would hope. They've invested in this group in Arizona. Zaven Collins and Kaiser White are going to be your 2 linebackers. And then Isaiah Simmons, there's going to be a lot of interesting conversations about where he's going to play, what position he is he even good? This is going to be a big year for all of those questions. But as far as their base 4-2 defense, it's going to be Zaven and Kaiser White with Isaiah Simmons as kind of that, kind of Cam Chancellor role, the strong safety, the weak side backer, the slot corner, various different alignments. He is an impact as far as the area of the field that linebackers participate in. So I wanted to at least note him here, even though he's by position more of a defensive back, at least how I project him next year. And I think the signing of Kaiser White made that very clear. And honestly, Isaiah Simmons' tape made that very clear. He's a horrible linebacker in run defense. He really is. He'll have some splash plays because he's such a special athlete, but that's why you like him splashing as a defensive back and not as an actual linebacker between the tackles. And it's not like these 2 starters, Zaven Collins and Kaiser White, are all that special as run defense players either, but at least they can do it in a more traditional sense for the position. What I do love is how these 3 guys will defend that intermediate part of the field, between the 3 of them. They rank 10th for me for linebacker coverage, and I think the upside here is even higher. Zaven Collins has shown a lot of flashes. Kaiser White is what he is a very good coverage linebacker, a perfect number 2. And then Isaiah Simmons, he's, again, shown a ton of flashes in coverage, but if he can just stick to one position and have Jonathan Gannon really develop him in that spot, because he's worn a million different hats. Look at what the Ravens did with Kyle Hamilton. This is the complete opposite. They said, Kyle Hamilton, you're a dime back. Focus on that. Don't worry about playing free safety one play, edge rusher the next, middle linebacker the play after that. No, just learn this position, get really good at it. And I think Isaiah Simmons in this spot can be an even more dynamic version of what Kyle Hamilton was for the Ravens, who graded out really well as a coverage player last year. So I'm excited to see these 3 guys together. I think this is the best thing this defense has to offer, is the combination of these 3 guys defending hook curls, curl flats, screens, to the sideline, RPOs. It's at least one strength that this defense has to work around. Now, as run defenders, I rank them 26th. We talked about Simmons. We talked about Kaiser White. He's not the biggest guy. He's not the most physically imposing run defender, but he's fine. He's been very up and down throughout his career in that department. The big catch is going to be Zaven Collins. Can he take that big step up, potentially with better defensive coaching, and really emerge at his upside as that true dominant 3-down linebacker? He got really improved as the year went on last year, but a tough start. And it was just I one of my least favorite things about any team in the league is how often they rotated these guys. It's so hard for a young linebacker anywhere to learn this position, let alone when you have frickin' Ben Neiman and Tanner Vallejo coming in and stealing half your snaps. It takes like 3 to 4 years for these linebackers to figure things out. And I think Simmons struggles for a variety of different reasons. I just don't think it's his natural position. Zaven Collins, it's like, no, let's just let the guy play, grow by trial and fire, and it'll come. Just be a little bit more patient, Vance Joseph. So I think this is going to be a big year for Zaven Collins. Definitely one of the bigger, breakout candidates for this team. And honestly, I do have expectations that it's going to happen, that it's going to come with Zaven Collins. Because seriously, one of the biggest things for him is going to be tackling. He was one of the worst tackling linebackers in the NFL. Better coaching should be able to tell him, look, I get you are a bigger linebacker. You've got, and you're fast. You've got a lot of momentum. It's difficult to break down and, collect yourself at the point of attack. But he has got to do a better job of doing that. He's missed in both years now about 16% of his tackles. Very marginal improvement last year, but from 18% to 16%, not good enough. But if that can come, he's a great coverage linebacker. He always was, going back to his time in college, but he reads the field extremely well. He's great at reading and reacting to the quarterback's eyes. He understands route combinations and how to navigate his way towards traffic and towards throwing lanes. And I don't think, there's serious issues when it comes to his trigger and run discipline and all that stuff. There's room to improve for sure. But yeah, it's the tackling, it's the coaching. And if it doesn't come together this year, it'd be pretty frustrating, because if you can't get it to work for Zaven Collins, a first-round pick in year 3, it's like, when is anything going to go right for this defense? But I'm optimistic. Beyond that, they signed Chris Barnes, decent signing, a good third linebacker from Green Bay. Owen Papo, a lot of excitement for him. I've seen a lot of Cardinals fans saying he's going to play a lot. I couldn't disagree more. I think they're going to play Chris Barnes before they play Owen Papo. Look, the 4.39 speed is really exciting. I get it. It's going to be great for special teams. But he sucks. He had the worst tape, I think, out of any linebacker in the entire class. He has no idea what he's looking at. 4.39 speed is great if you have any idea how to play football, and he doesn't. So can they coach that into him? It's going to be a 3-year project before you want Owen Papo on the field. Ezekiel Turner, we'll see if he can stick around this roster. He's been kind of a Vance Joseph darling still here. And then Josh Woods has played some ball going back to, I think, Detroit. So for what it's worth, it's not the worst linebacker group in the league, especially in terms of coverage. But unfortunately, it gets bad again when you look at this secondary, where they rank 29th for me in terms of defensive back coverage. And let's just kind of transition this while starting with Isaiah Simmons, who is included in both of these grades, which we don't do for a lot of defensive players, but he's such a unique player. To me, in their base defense, which I expect to be kind of like what Baltimore did last year, I think that's a good blueprint for them, where you're playing Isaiah Simmons as the starting nickel corner, essentially. I know you don't want to think about him as a corner because he's more safety linebacker, but that's what he's going to do. He's going to be covering tight ends, slot receivers, which is going to be a challenge for him. But, he's really fast, and I think he can do it. And that length does make up for some of his quickness deficiencies. I do want to see him anticipate man coverage defensive assignments much better. It's tough. He's able to turn his hips for a big guy, but he is a big guy. It's hard for him to turn his hips, so he has to anticipate much better. But as far as him being a physical presence against much more wide receivers, slot tight ends, it's going to be much more comfortable for him than trying to come into the box and play middle linebacker half the time. So I'm very intrigued by what he can do out there. But the ball's in his court, man. He has been way too up and down throughout his career. He's made some big plays. He's a splashy guy. He's got some, playmaking instincts when he can read the quarterback's eyes and when he can really let it loose. The upside is still there. This guy was drafted 8th overall for a reason. But this is kind of a make or break year for Isaiah Simmons. And what this staff does with him is going to be maybe the most interesting aspect of year one for Jonathan Gannon and Nick Rallis. And then, you look at the outside corners, and it's probably the worst group of outside corners in the league. Could argue Minnesota, I suppose. But, Antonio Hamilton, he's a reactionary risk taker who doesn't have good natural coverage skills. He's kind of a boomer bust coverage player. Ideally, he'd be a fourth corner, someone you can bring in as a dime back, like a PJ Williams type, put him in certain matchups. In this zone-heavy defense, I think he can be adequate, but you're certainly not excited, and you're definitely hoping that if and when Garrett Williams can get healthy off of that 2022 ACL injury at Syracuse, the third-round pick, you're hoping he can emerge as the starter, and Antonio Hamilton can fall into that dime back role where he'd be much better. And I do expect that to happen. It's just, it might take some time. Garrett Williams played this exact system at Syracuse. It's not going to be a matter of learning the defense. It's just going to be a matter of how quickly can he get healthy. Really instinctive guy. He has those lightning quick hips, that click and close, fast trigger that you look for from a off zone quarters style corner. Kind of think like Greg Newsome for Cleveland several years ago, just much lower scale, much less efficiency. Not as good man to man as Greg Newsome was, but he can be a player for them. He's definitely someone that Cardinals fans are and should be excited about. And it was a good pick in the third round, stealing a little bit of value on a guy that, had he been able to finish his season and do all the testing and stuff, might have snuck into the second round. So all eyes will be on him whenever he's ready to go. Inversely, Kytrell Clark's another guy that I got to say keep your eyes on. We haven't even talked about Marco Wilson yet. I think he's going to get a little bit more runway. But as far as like emerging as a starter, like I think taking Antonio Hamilton's job is a good place to start there. Kytrell Clark, really good at Louisville running this system. Copy and paste everything I said about Garrett Williams, fluid athleticism and playmaking with his eyes on the quarterback. A lot of people slotted, pun intended, Kytrell Clark as a slot corner because he's 5'9". I didn't. I actually had him as a scheme fit. Like of course, you're small, you might be a good slot corner, but to me, it reminds me much more of guys like Darius Williams, DJ Reed a little bit, as guys like, no, I actually want them playing quarters, using those quick, fluid athletic abilities with those playmaking skills that these smaller guys have had to develop over time because they, can't lean on their size and athletic ability. So I like the fit and definitely someone to keep an eye on. I don't know if he'll be like a day one starter, but I would predict at some point there's a good chance that Kytrell Clark is out there. And I wouldn't be stunned if he's another one of these Darius Williams types of, day three steals on a guy that fell because he's undersized. But the league is waking up to see that if you run this system, you're not pressing a lot. Why does your corner have to be 6'2", right? Get a smart player with really fluid athletic skills. They can play the position. So they got two of them in Garrett Williams and Kytrell Clark. Obviously, Clark, a 6th round pick or whatever it was, so tamper expectations. But as far as the opportunity and the fit, I think it's pretty damn good. Now, let's talk about Marco Wilson, because I do think he's going to hold on to this job, most likely. I'm a big Marco Wilson guy. I called it one of the steals of the draft when the Cardinals took him years ago, and he really flashed last year. Picked off Tom Brady twice, and really came along in an encouraging way. It's a guy that he did cost Florida a shot at a national championship in the Kyle Pitts, Kyle Trask year, because he threw his shoe after a big 4th down stop, and the penalty ended up letting the other team win the game. Someone that his play style indicates that he's not, how do I want to say this? He's not the most composed, technically efficient player, I guess. I don't know. I don't want to say he lacks football IQ, but he's just very young in terms of football IQ. And I think some of that started to click into place last year. He's still a little bit too loose for my liking in coverage as far as the reactionary quickness. The route squeeze don't allow unnecessary separation. I think he trusts his recovery a little bit more than he should for any NFL corner, even if his recovery is elite with his athletic ability. So a big year for him. I think he could lose the starting job week 1 to somebody, and I think he could play well all year and become a good starter for them. It's going to be a large range of outcomes for him. Another thing about him, one of the worst run defending perimeter corners in the league. Not only is he an easy block, where I don't think the effort is where it needs to be, but his tackling is as bad as it gets. So that's something that should be a priority for him this offseason to clean up. Lucky for him, that's not a strength of Kytrell Clark's game either. Christian Matthew was, I think, a 7th-round pick last year. He got on the field. I didn't see much in him really at any point, so we'll see. And then I also list right now Rashad Fenton as the dime back. I think as long as Garrett Williams is recovering, he's their next man up in the secondary. He's been a massive stock down guy and one of the weirder stock down fall-offs around the league. I mean, he was poised to me to earn a 3-year, $25 million, kind of like the Cam Sutton contract that Detroit got. Rashad Fenton a year ago, I would have said those two guys are like the same dude. Really kind of quick-witted, quick twitch, slot corner. Really amazing tackler in Kansas City. But out of nowhere, Kansas City just kind of benches him, trades him to Atlanta for a 7th-round pick, and he flamed out in Atlanta as well. So an unbelievable fall-off for Rashad Fenton. I like the dart throw on a guy like this who just a year ago was a quality starting corner, and he's young. But, man, like, I don't know what happened. Can they get that guy back? That's the hope, right? It's unlikely at this point, but it's possible. I list him there as the kind of 6th dime back because I think in those looks where you don't want Isaiah Simmons as a slot corner covering, potential real wide receivers, real great route runners, you can keep Isaiah Simmons out there as a 2-shell free safety or maybe as a buzz safety, like one of those type of safeties with Baker and Thompson back there. And then Fenton can actually be your slot corner. That's what I kind of expect from that group. And I don't know if that guy's going to be Rashad Fenton. It could be Nate Hairston, who's played some snaps in this league. Chris Boyd, I'd be a little bit surprised if he made this team. But there's your cornerback group. And then there's some other names as well that I wouldn't expect anything from. But into the safety group, it's really just Budda Baker and Jalen Thompson, right? If anything happens to those guys, you're talking about, all right, Antonio Hamilton, you want to play some safety? Isaiah Simmons, you remember what you did at Clemson? Remember what you did for Vance Joseph a couple times? Like, I guess it probably would be Isaiah Simmons, but I don't love Isaiah Simmons as a deep safety type of dude. I think he could do it as like a true free safety, but in a split safety type of deal. Maybe. I don't know. Isaiah Simmons is just a weird player, but you get the point. It's all about Budda Baker and Jalen Thompson, and it does look like they are going to retain Budda Baker after he requested a trade. Great work by Arizona, because when you talk about, did I say the linebackers was the best thing that this team has going for them? Because that if I did, that's wrong. It's this safety duo. When they hired Gannon, the one thing I kind of got excited about was like, all right, well, safety is arguably a more important position in a quarters heavy defense because it's harder to find those guys that can run that system well. And your outside corners are more of an extension of your safety staff than in like a press man defense, because everybody's playing off, you're reading and reacting, you're matching coverages, and everybody's converting into man coverage eventually, whether you're a safety or a corner. And I need a soundbite or a bell or something every time I talk about how well converted slot corner to safeties play in these quarters heavy defenses. And, everybody that's been around the channel is laughing because it's so consistent around the league now. Budda Baker has played slot corner going back to Washington. He's done it in Arizona. He's played free safety, but he doesn't have amazing, he's fast, but he hasn't had these amazing playmaking instincts as a free safety. But his tape, when he runs quarters, so good. He has a quick trigger. He's smart. It's difficult to be able to help as a run defender from quarters, because both guys are playing at about 10-yard depth. You got to be able to crash downhill and defend the run and recognize the run. He's going to be awesome in this system, and losing him would be devastating for this locker room, for this team trying to. You got to have something to build around back there. And this safety duo is something you can absolutely build around. I haven't talked about Jalen Thompson yet, but, Budda Baker is smart for staying with Jonathan Gannon, because you look at the year that Chauncey Gardner-Johnson had playing this role for Philadelphia, the playmaking opportunities are going to be there. And it's simple. It's do the math and gamble when, this is getting really deep into it. But if for example, if it's trips and the outside corner has the single side receiver, you can basically turn your head towards the trip side and just gamble on, jumping that crossing route or jumping whatever. And I think Budda Baker is going to make several plays doing that. And there's going to be a lot more of that in this system. So I'm expecting a big year for Budda, who I don't think has been rightfully so recognized as this great coverage safety. He's very good, but we don't talk about him as we talk about Jesse Bates or Kevin Byard or Minkah Fitzpatrick, right? Budda's known for his pursuit, his tackling, his tenacity as a safety, but I think the coverage could get better in this specific system. So I'm excited for that. And then Jalen Thompson's just a baby version of Budda Baker. So for him to be next to him, I love that. I think Jalen Thompson can get better in this system. But both guys, from a run defense perspective, are exactly what you want from a quarters defense. Both guys can crash downhill in a hurry. And I'm excited to see these guys play off of each other in a Fangio-style defense. For all of its deficiencies, having two guys back here like this can certainly protect you from a lot of the issues when it comes to run defense and giving up easy underneath stuff. These guys are going to take a lot of that stuff. They're not going to take a lot of it away, but they'll certainly limit the explosiveness of it because of how good they are coming downhill and how consistent they are as tacklers and how fast they arrive as well. Beyond those two, other than Isaiah Simmons playing deep, there's really not anyone worth mentioning. Josh Thomas got on the field for them last year. Don't know much about him. Juju Hughes, Andre Chechezere, and Javonte Moffitt. We'll see who ends up making the team back there. But it's all about Budda. It's all about Jalen Thompson. And again, they have their issues. It's pretty clear, most notably at outside corner. There certainly will be games where Marco Wilson, Antonio Hamilton, probably Garrett Williams, Kytrell Clark are getting exposed. But the hope is by year's end, you kind of figure out what these guys' roles are, getting used to the new defense, and ideally you kind of know at least 3 out of 5 starters heading into next year would be ideal. Maybe it's 5 out of 5, depending. Marco Wilson and Garrett Williams do have upside to be starters. Maybe even Kytrell Clark, I don't know. But that's the hope for Gannon coming in with a lot of work to do on this secondary. So your defense overall, it ranks 32nd. It's not controversial. The roster stinks. Steve Keim left these guys in a really bad way. But I do think it's important for Gannon to show he was if you're going to hire a defensive mind head coach, you want to see him elevate, not necessarily elevate, but figure out how to use Isaiah Simmons, get Zaven Collins to be the most of them. Find creative ways to manufacture a pass rush out of this anemic group. Get Budda Baker and Jalen Thompson to cement themselves as a dynamic top-of-the-league safety duo again. That's the kind of stuff you need to look for in year one with Jonathan Gannon. If some of those things aren't happening, it's start to. I know the expectations are low. You got to see something, right? You got to really see the vision for this defense to feel good about this group after year one, and that's what this year is about for the defense, is identifying talent and cohesiveness, schematically speaking. So there's your overall team picture. I did split it up with Kyler and Hopkins, and then without. So they would climb all the way up to 31st with Kyler and Hopkins. It's just tough when you have a defense that ranks so low and you have staff questions, or at least a new staff across the board. It's just tough. Like, they would still be up against it. Would remind me a lot of the 2020 Houston Texans, or maybe the 2019 Houston Texans, where the offense was really good, but they won like 4 games. Like, that would kind of remind me of this team a little bit. But obviously without Kyler and Hopkins, they're 32nd offensive in the league. Defense 32nd. Special teams is fine. I got Matt Prater at kicker. I like the addition of Owen Popo. We basically just look at what their special team coverage grade was last year, and theirs was fine. And then we slide it up or down based on the kicker situation, and they got a pretty good kicker situation. So should be a very sound, indifferent special teams unit. Special teams gets 1% of the formula here. By the way, the whole calculus is in the description below if you're curious what the different splits are. And then I have my spreadsheet that I make available to my Patreon when the season's done. Let's recap their strengths and weaknesses, and we'll take a look at their schedule and be on our way here. So not a ton of strengths for this team. It is what it is, but I do think the intermediate pass defense with the safety duos, the linebackers, Isaiah Simmons, there's a lot to work with there, right? Like, I want to see this team defend play action, defend RPOs and the middle of the field, defend it well. Make that a strength of this defense, build around that. I do think there is something to be said about open competition. We saw this with the Miami Dolphins when they were rebuilding pre-Tua. The Houston Texans over the last couple of years, like, you can find some guys, you can find some scrappiness if you embrace this idea that the best players are going to play, the high work ethic guys, you're trying to develop a culture. You can, these types of teams tend to get you some upsets on, scrappiness alone. And I think that could be the case if Gannon's a good coach. And then, offensively, if Kyler Murray's there, if DeAndre Hopkins there, that's a pretty dynamic set of quarterback and weaponry. But there's a pretty major if, right? But especially Kyler, he's a difference-making quarterback. He changes the numbers and elevates everything when he does get back. And as bad as things are for the Cardinals, they weren't drafting a quarterback with the number 3 pick in this draft for a reason. Like, they have that guy. So excited to hopefully get him back. Weaknesses, pretty self-explanatory. Pretty much the entire defense, especially the front 7. You're going to be able to run on these guys. You're going to be able to, as good as the safety group is, you're going to have all day to throw with some pretty bad corners on the outside. Like, it's not a great recipe for success. Like I said, pretty self-explanatory. I think offensively, there is just a situation where Kyler's not out there for the first 2 months of the season with really bad run blocking. And the play calling is still getting developed here. So there is so much for this team to work on. They rank 32nd for a reason, even if there's areas for excitement down the road. Let's look at their schedule. What are we talking for this team? And it's just hard. I kind of looked at this estimating Kyler to miss the first 6 weeks of the season as kind of a middling, estimate for this squad. It's not going to be a good start. This team's over-under is 4.5 for a reason. Their first 5 games are very challenging. I think they will be estimated to lose all of those convincingly. Maybe they steal an upset, but it's pretty unlikely. Then you get the Rams, I think, are a beatable team this year. So maybe that's their first win on the year. But let's face it, going game by game with this team, projecting how many wins they're going to get, it's almost irrelevant. maybe some Cardinals fans don't want to hear that, but I think 99% of Cardinals fans are acceptant of that. It's just going to be about watching the players, watching the coaching, see if the signs of life are there. And then maybe as you get into, week 11 at Houston, the Rams at home, the bye week, couple of fluffier defenses in Chicago and Seattle, maybe you can show some signs of life at the end of the year, win a couple games at the end of the year, and start to see the vision as you head into, the 2024 season. That's really the goal here. And that's going to wrap up our first deep dive. I really hope you guys enjoyed. This is the first of 32 of these. This is probably my favorite thing I do on this channel. The interaction with you guys, the comments down below. I do try to read them all, especially for this series. So let me know. Did I get this ranking right? Who do you think comes in at 31? While you're down there, please do make sure you like the video, subscribe. We'll be back heading to Chicago to visit some family this weekend, and then we'll be back with our next one within the week. Tuesday, Wednesday-ish, potentially. Maybe a whole week from now for the next one. But we're off. Deep dives are here. I'm excited. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you later. Peace out.